Samstapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. O Ramakrishna, establisher of the eternal and universal religion and the bestower or the embodiment of all religions, to thee, noblest of all divine incarnations, I offer my salutations. So we are going to highlight a few instances in Sri Ramakrishna's life that might be of some use to us. There are two instances worth noting in connection with the upliftment of humanity in general. When Swami Vivekananda came back to India and established his mission, there were some devotees of Ramakrishna that thought that Ramakrishna's message and Swami Vivekananda's message were somehow different. He said he was more interested in the development of inner spirituality. But Vivekananda, who was given all the authority and became the spokesperson for the ideals and messages of Sri Ramakrishna, came with a very, very social message, with the simple, the Jiva is Shiva. That is, practical Vedanta would be to worship God in man and in all other beings, but for the upliftment of those who were deprived in some way or another, those who are uneducated. He got that shock in Dehradun, where he saw the difficult circumstances of the people there. And the background was his own sister had committed suicide, and he understood the plight of women in India in general. And his most difficult days were when his father, or after his father had passed away, and he had to suffer, try to find some earnings of a living for his family. And he registers this is one of the most difficult periods of his whole life, going barefoot here and there, sometimes having food, sometimes not, and also suffering all the scandals against his own character. So he became desperate. Then he got a revelation, and he became inspired to say, let me put all this in the divine hands. And he visits Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna gets him ultimately to accept the Mother Kali. I think everybody's familiar with that episode. But it's incorrect to say that Ramakrishna was insensitive to the plight of the material suffering people, and there are two episodes, both in terms of pilgrimage. The one episode is quite familiar to us. The episode is in terms of on his way to Varanasi, and the year is 1868. And Mathur and his wife, that Mathur Babu, who was his benefactor, arranged for a pilgrimage to northern India. And they wanted Sri Ramakrishna to accompany them. At their earnest request, the master consented to be one of the party. They started on 27th January, that much is known, and they halted for a few days in Dergaon to visit the shrine of Vaidyanath. So an interesting thing happened there. And one day, while passing through a neighboring village, Sri Ramakrishna was greatly distressed to see the wretched condition of its people. Moved with sympathy for them, he said to Mathur, you are the steward of the mother. Feed these poor people and give every one a piece of cloth. And Mathur at first hesitated, saying, this pilgrimage will cost a lot of money, and these people are very numerous. You have to understand, Mathur Babu had hired 3 train carriages full of things, full of servants and materials and all kinds of things, food and what have you, all provisions, costly thing. 3 railway carriages, imagine. So when Matu Babu had protested, Ramakrishna's retort was, "You are the steward of the mother. Feed these poor people and give everyone a piece of cloth. You are the steward of the mother, the Divine Mother, because he is the son-in-law of Rani Rasmani, who had a vision to make a temple dedicated to Mother Kali. And so, Rani Rasmani having passed away, it fell on his shoulders. He is now the steward, not just of the temple, but the Divine Mother. And Rani Rasmani, in order to avoid controversy, the controversy being that she was a low-caste person, and so to avoid any difficulties in connection with that, she never registered the property in her name. She registered it in the name of the Divine Mother. Now, no priest can deny their services there. So you are a student of the Divine Mother. Then it goes on further. He says, the objection is like this, we may be short of funds, so the journey, if we try to feed and clothe them, so what do you say to this, Father? Now, it's interesting enough that Matu Babu considers Sri Ramakrishna as his father. He has enough experience of him and has witnessed some divine episodes in Sri Ramakrishna's life, divine moods, and also some visions. One vision was Ramakrishna walking in the courtyard, and he saw there the transformation that Ramakrishna had made while walking. So, but Sri Ramakrishna was inexorable, and he shed tears. Now, nobody shed tears until and unless they are genuinely moved by compassion in this case. And he was moved to tears at the sight of such abject misery. And he said in anguish, "Fie upon you, I am not going to Varanasi." Now that's an interesting statement, because Varanasi, everybody wants to go to Varanasi. It is arguably one of the most sacred places on the planet, and to all Hindus, very sacred. Every Hindu wants to die in Kashi or Varanasi. And he's going there for the first time. Such a wonderful sacred city. And he says, I'd rather stay here than go there. On what basis? We can speculate. Because God is present there, in the poor, in the deprived, in the hungry. Varanasi, no doubt God is there, but God is everywhere. And particularly in here, in this condition of misery and difficulty. So he says, I'm not going to Varanasi. I prefer to remain with these helpless people. Helpless people means if you're in condition to help them, which he clearly was, then you should do it. So like a petulant child, now Matu Babu is considering him as a father. But Ramakrishna has this peculiar characteristic. Ramakrishna is a Paramahamsa. And what is the characteristic of Paramahamsa? He's not confined or conditioned to any of the fetters that the so-called normal humans are confined to, including shame. So innocent as a child. And so he's like a petulant child. He left Mathu's company and sat with the poor villagers. You can imagine the scene. And part and parcel of what we're doing this evening, and every time we speak about Holy Mother or Ramakrishna, it's a moment for reflection. It's not just information transfer. I'm not just giving a lecture. What we're trying to do together is to try and get some insight into these divine personalities, so that in some way they can make some kind of inner inspiration, some internal shift for us. And part of that is really to imagine all this happening. One wonderful form of meditation will be to recall the incidents in the life of our chosen ideal. Imagine now that you are traveling along with the entire company on this pilgrimage, attending to the master, looking after his needs as best you possibly can, making sure that he is well fed, making sure that he's not inconvenienced in every way, and stopping there. And what does he say? He makes a request. You argue on practical, so-called practical grounds. If I give something to these villages, then all this costly pilgrimage, some of that cost will be drawn away from it, and then the pilgrimage will not be successful. So he's thinking in terms of material success. Ramakrishna has no business with it. His movement is the movement of the heart. In no way is he mean-minded. And he's resolute. And he's saying, you can leave me here if you want. You go on. But of course, nobody will go on. So ultimately, at the sight of his compassion, Mathu was much moved. He himself was moved. He changed his mind and he ordered bales of cloth from Kolkata to distribute among them and fed them well. And Sri Ramakrishna then cheerfully started for Varanasi. As he approached Varanasi, continues, by boat across the Ganga, the city of Shiva appeared to him to be made of gold. And he was about to sacrifice that entire thing for the upliftment of rural people. A condensed mass of spirituality he saw Varanasi as. It seemed as if the precious thoughts of countless monks and devotees had accumulated there, making the place an abode of the gods. Now, we had one devotee in Ireland many years ago, and he had two motives for going to India. The one motive really was to go to Varanasi, not because it was a holy city, but because at that time it was the best place to see the solar eclipse. But then realizing the significance of Varanasi, he asked me, so it's a holy city. So this is a wonderful place, thinking probably that it was a place of solitude and contemplation. And I had to warn him against a culture shock. I said, what you'll find in Varanasi is so-called normal Indian life, more so, because things are busy. You'll have dirt in the streets, you'll have cows walking, you'll have people walking, you'll have people pushing. There's a lot of noise, traffic noise and otherwise. But in the early morning and the late evening, when the sun rises and the sun sets, then you'll find this goldenness of Varanasi. But Ramakrishna doesn't have that view. Ramakrishna sees the whole thing as a city of gold. He has the insight of the feeling of it, the vibration of it, that is built from countless holy episodes, holy people, the very holiness of the city producing a vibration. And the fact is, spirituality is not found exclusively in solitude. It's found in all the people. It's found in the hustle and bustle. It's found in the traffic. It's found in the sounds. It's found in all the noises. It's found in the cleanliness. It's found in the dirt. Everywhere it's found. And of course, for us, the city is holy by association. That so many holy people associated with Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna himself visited there, stayed there. You can even visit the room where Ramakrishna stayed. And beautiful, beautiful. That alone will conjure up this sense of sacredness. But the lesson in us is clear. God is in everyone and everything. And where we see the manifestation of that suffering, we are moved toward compassion. And in this incident is the Ramakrishna mission's work projected and prophesied. It's very clear. Now, a similar incident is less known. And it occurs in East Bengal, what is now Bangladesh. And it's easy to get these two incidents confused. So let's have a look at this. This is from a book, Journeys, Journeying with Ramakrishna. And again, we can imagine going on a pilgrimage with Ramakrishna. It happens that Madhu Babu also, and this is probably after the death of Akshay, and Ramakrishna was very, very upset because of a young man, young family and so on, his nephew, and they speculated that to relieve his anguish, they went on a pilgrimage. Ramakrishna is a child in this mode, and he agrees, yes, take me if you want, that's fine. If he had stayed, it would also have been okay, but he says, let me agree to go. So Sri Ramakrishna went with Madhu Mohan, and he's going to collect rent. He's a landlord, after all, a wealthy man. And he wants to collect rent from his tenants in what is now Bangladesh. And he's going to the place where his own family teacher was. Madhu has two teachers. One is Ramakrishna himself, and he regards him as his father. The other is his other teacher from prior to Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna is happy to go to his place where his teacher was born and so on, and happy that he is honoring his guru, his teacher. So he goes with him, and he goes by boat, and he goes to Madhu Baba's place, and it's a newly acquired estate actually, and it's a place called Kalaigata. And when they arrive, a crowd of almost naked, emaciated, hungry people thronged the riverside to see these distinguished people. One is rich, and the other one has a reputation. It's this rich man's guru. A terrible drought was ravaging the land, and the villagers had been in the grip of a famine for many months. Naturally, the wretched condition of the famished people moved Sri Ramakrishna to bitter tears. Almost exactly the same incident, but in a different place. On Madhu Mohan's inquiry, the compassionate master said, I can't stand to see the suffering of these people. And you are the steward of mother's estate, almost word for word. Give them each a piece of cloth and a good meal and some oil for their heads. Madhu Mohan found himself in an awkward predicament because he had come to supervise the collection of taxes. And no doubt the crops had failed for the last 2 years, and his own tenants had been reduced to extreme misery, and he still expected to extract some money from them. And so, guessing the situation, Sri Ramakrishna pleaded with Madhu Mohan to remit their dues. Now, typical feudal landlord that he was, Madhu Mohan tried to prevail upon Sri Ramakrishna and persuade him. He was a businessman. But Sri Ramakrishna again was inexorable. And he said, well, do you think you are the owner of this estate? See, this question of ownership is where wars are fought over. There's a place in the Middle East you must have heard of, Israel-Palestine situation, and one arguing against the other, saying this is my land, this is my land. And I may have told you before that I was asked to facilitate groups of people from Israel and Palestine, groups who had agreed to talk to each other. This was at Trinity College. And they broke up into small groups. I facilitated one group. I was asked to do that. And all I did was to bring out Sri Ramakrishna's parable. God laughs on 2 occasions. Never mind about the first. The second one is when 2 brothers fight over land. This is my land. No, this is my land. And the Lord says, my dear children, it's my land. You're fighting over something that is not yours. There's nothing that is ours, and we have therefore no rights. The Bhagavad Gita gives us only one right. We have the right to work. That's all. Not the right to the fruits of it. because they're not ours. They don't belong to us. All our energy is borrowed energy. We are simply riding on the wave of divine grace, all supplied to us freely for a purpose, for a designated purpose. That is why there's an individuality that we have, and we alone can do something nobody else has done in the past, nobody can do now, and nobody will ever do in the future. This is our role, but don't for a moment think that you're not simply an instrumental element. It's not your body. See, today we have this idea, oh, it's my body, I can do what I like with it. Who said it's your body? This is a secular point of view, a material point of view. No, there's nothing to do with it, with you. You have no ownership of it. You are renting this body. Ramakrishna puts it that way. What is disease and illness? It's the rent we have to pay for the body. We can't avoid it. As long as you're renting, see the language, renting the body. It's not ours. Your children are not your own. You are given the custody of them. That's all it is. So he points this out. So he says, Sri Ramakrishna pleaded to remit their dues. Typical feudal landlord that he was, he tried to prevail upon Sri Ramakrishna, but he resisted, and Sri Ramakrishna said, well, do you think you are the owner of this estate? No, you are only a steward of the Divine Mother. Not only because of his position again in the temple, Kali temple, but also because what other energy is in the universe except that of the Divine Mother Nature? It is Brahman manifest as energy. Science will tell us all there is in this world is energy. That's all there is. I know it doesn't look like it. It looks like a table and a chair and a this and a that. But when you boil it down to its fundamental level, it is all energy. And even on the materialist level, there's no energy of your own. It's all borrowed energy. We're running around on canned sunshine. It's all solar energy. So, you're just the steward. These people are the mother's tenants. They're not your tenants. They're the mother's tenants. You must spend the mother's money for them. And when they are suffering, how can you refuse to help them as much as you can? This is mother's command. There's no option about it. And so reluctant, Matru Mohan finally gave in. He had cloth brought again from Calcutta and gave each person one piece of cloth and fed the people sumptuously. He fed them for 7 days. And it's estimated there were 700 of them, 700 people for 7 days. So we shouldn't think that the Ramakrishna mission started its missionary work of philanthropic work, of feeding and educating and so on and so forth. All of these philanthropic works, social activities, the Master himself did it and said we cannot stop there. We cannot simply stand by idly. Now the problem is in what we used to call underdeveloped countries, what we now call developing countries, where there's enormous poverty, regions of South America, regions of Africa, regions of Asia and India and so on, where we see poverty, we become extremely used to it and therefore very blasé about it. I know in Africa, because of AIDS virus, there's an enormous amount of orphans there, AIDS, war, all kinds of things, all kinds of factors. You stop a car in a town and you're surrounded by young children in a terrible state, all clamoring at your windows. Supposing you give to everyone, it's not possible. But don't ignore them either. Something you can do for them. In Zimbabwe, I used to carry food with me and give them food. It's not like that so much in developed countries. There are cases like that. But developed countries, I've tried it. Many people begging on the streets. You offer them food, they don't really want it. They would rather have money. There are some who want food, and you buy the food. So 700 people for 7 days. You see something, familiarity breeds contempt. I once saw an engineer, and he was hosting me in a certain town. It was a mining town. And he was called out, and he spent the whole night fixing a problem. And I asked him, what happened? He said, 2 weeks ago, I walked past a motor, and I heard the motor wasn't running regularly, and I thought I have to do something about it. Next day, he passed again and said, oh, that motor. Third day, yes, someday I'll get around to the motor, but it's not the priority today. Fourth day, he hardly heard it. Fifth day, it broke down. So you see, we tend to overlook these things, and some people make some excuses based on some false theology. Oh, never mind, it's their karma. Well, it's your karma to attend to them. So where's your compassion in all this? We need this tremendous compassion, particularly in today's world. More than ever we need it in today's world. So he gave them all these things. He also gave them oil for their heads, and on the 7th day gave a quarter of a rupee to each of them. And Sri Ramakrishna was very happy to see 700 hungry people eating together for 7 days. And pleased to see his master happy, Matru Mohan returned to Dakshinaswar without his money. So you wonder, why did he go there in the first place? Well, he went to, of course, honor the place where his guru was born and so on. That's okay. But he principally went there as a businessman to collect money from people who really were not in a position to give it. And instead, he gave them money. So this text goes on like this, raises some interesting issues and questions. He says, in this context, it would be good to take a look at the relationship with or between Matru Mohan and Sri Ramakrishna. Sometimes Matru Mohan would treat Sri Ramakrishna as his revered spiritual father, and sometimes as an innocent young boy entirely dependent on him. Now, in the wonderful book written by Swami Sharananda that comes out in English as The Great Master in 2 volumes, what is the Leela Prasang, he writes this: it's very clear that by virtue of the motiveless grace of the Master, Matru's love was so intensified that father became his very life. Besides that, it was his behavior like that of a boy, which also attracted Matru in no small measure. Is it therefore strange that there naturally arose in the powerful, vigorous, and intelligent Matru an effort to protect him in all circumstances? That would have been divinely arranged, isn't it? Because he is his benefactor. Ramakrishna doesn't have to ask for anything. He willingly has his benefactor. By divine grace, it's like that. So he's protecting him in all circumstances. Therefore, just as on the one hand he depended on the Master's divine power, so on the other hand, he always kept himself ready to protect Father, whom he knew to be like an inexperienced boy. This is why Sri Ramakrishna readily yielded to Matru's view and suggestions and agreed to accompany him on these trips. According to this book, The Great Master, Sri Ramakrishna undertook these 2 trips to Matru's estates sometime after the death of Akshay, as I mentioned, which happened around about 1869. Matru Mohan himself passed away a few years later, in 1871, 16th July. In all probability, this all happened probably in the summer of 1870, something like that. and East Bengal in the latter part of that year. Soon after, maybe Durga Puja. And the rest of this chapter deals with the second trip. To help the reader get some idea of this journey that we are taking with him. Some further descriptions will be there. Now, it was on this occasion, well, he mentions how Mohan's entourage includes Sri Ramakrishna and a few others, and 100 other people, plus, here's the thing, elephants, horses, horse-drawn carriages, and palanquins. Early in the morning of an auspicious day, the party set out. Now you can imagine this. This can be a wonderful meditation. A pink sun still hung low on the horizon. In spite of the elaborate arrangements and necessary precautions, the trip was not without mishap. And on the way, the palanquin carrying Sri Ramakrishna gave way, and the palanquin bearers dropped their burden, that is Sri Ramakrishna himself, and he escaped injury, and Mohan took him into his own palanquin and proceeded. See the level of protection he had, mixed with reverence. And as soon as the palanquin was repaired, Hridayaram got into it and hurried to catch up with the rest of the party. Now, it was also on this occasion that the road was a little rough. And so Ramakrishna said to Mohan, I want to ride on the elephant, like a child. See how it switches. Like a 5-year-old boy, I want to ride on the elephant. Matul Babu says, no, the road is too rough. You'll fall, etc., etc. No, I want to ride. Like a child, he insists. And eventually he rides on the elephant. That incident is also recorded here. And the elephant happened to be ridden by Matul Mohan, and he occupied the palanquin that was there for Ramakrishna. So that's an interesting relationship. We presume Sri Ramakrishna, childlike as he was, peeped out of the door of his palanquin on the journey. Now and then he peeped out to have a glimpse of the exquisite tapestry of nature woven with yellow and green fields, the blue sky and village scenes. At times his spirit would wander away, and at other times, perceiving the glory of God all around, he would be overwhelmed with ecstasy. It's incredible how we journey sometimes to places. For example, we're going to Dublin, from Dublin to, let's say, Dungannon, the birthplace of Sister Nivedita. And if I'm in a car with about 5 people, apart from the driver and myself, everyone is dozing. Everyone is asleep. Because nobody's bothered to observe the manifestation of nature all around you. There's lots to see. And even if you think all the countryside looks the same, then the very road is there. And Jesus said, I'm the way. So I'm the very road. So we should always keep alert and think of the Lord and keep in that presence, surely. And that's exactly what Ramakrishna was doing. He sets the example on a journey. Now, in relation then to Sri Ramakrishna's varying attitudes as a Paramahamsa, we can pick up the Gospel of Ramakrishna itself. We can see that Thursday, July 3rd, 1884. Now we can also imagine the scene. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in Balaram Bose's house in Kolkata. Those who know it and have visited can imagine it more easily. And near him were Ram, Balaram, Balaram's father, M meaning Mahendranath Gupta, Mohan, and several young devotees. Sri Ramakrishna went to the porch for a few minutes and then returned. As he was going out, Vishwambara's daughter, 6 or 7 years old, saluted him. On returning to the room, the master began talking to the little girl and her companions. We can imagine at her level, not as an adult. And these companions were of the same age, a group of young children like that. And the child says to the master, as children would do, I saluted you and you didn't even notice it. Out of the mouths of babes, straight, honest, truthful, straightforward. And the master smiling, he says, did you? I really didn't notice. You can see an attitude of a little fun in there. You didn't notice. Really? I didn't notice. And the child said, then wait, I want to salute you again. The other foot too. And Sri Ramakrishna laughs. He laughed and sat down. He returned the salute and bowed to the child, touching the ground with his forehead. Imagine. He asked her to sing, and the little child said, I swear I don't sing. And when the master pressed her again, she said, should you press me when I said I swear I don't? Should you press me when I said I swear? The master was very happy with the children and sang light songs to entertain them. What kind of songs? Songs that appeal to children. So, what did he sing? The translation goes like this. Come, let me braid your hair, lest your husband should scold you when he beholds you. Nothing to do with spirituality. In other words, coming down to the level of the children, because he was able himself to be the 5-year-old divine child of the Divine Mother. The children and the devotees laughed. From start to finish in this episode, you see fun, you see laughter, and the innocence of children all around. What a wonderful scene. The children and the devotees laughed, and the master says to the devotees, the Paramahamsa is like a 5-year-old child. He sees everything filled with consciousness. And we may also make our own commentary there. When everything is filled with consciousness, is also filled with bliss. A joy comes into it. At one time I was staying at Kamarpuka when Shivaram was a nephew of the master, was 4 or 5 years old. One day he was trying to catch grasshoppers near the pond. The leaves were moving, and to stop their rustling, he said to the leaves, hush, hush, I want to catch a grasshopper. You see, what we do is, we take the innocence of a child and impose our adult stupidity on it. So that by the age of 18, 19, we've lost all our inherent creativity. That's the judgment of modern psychologists today. We have lost all the artistic value of looking at the world. If you look at the stars at night, you can say these are masses of gases revolving, converting hydrogen to helium, and they're beaming out photons that are millions of light years away, and they're traveling through space at the speed of light, and the eye is catching it. That's one way of saying it. Another way of saying it is looking up at the night sky, or down into the night sky, as I prefer to say, and saying, oh, what beautiful pearls around the Divine Mother's neck. Why not? Why not give an artistic, aesthetic bent to your mind? Will it not elevate the mind when you do it? Do we also have to be childlike? Not childish, of course. Hush, I want to catch a grasshopper. On another day, it was stormy. It rained hard. Shivaram was with me inside the house, he says. There were flashes of lightning. He wanted to open the door and go out. I scolded him and stopped him, but still he peeped out now and then. When he saw the lightning, he exclaimed, there, uncle, they are striking matches again. The Paramansa is like a child, he says. He cannot distinguish between a stranger and a relative. He isn't particular about worldly relationships. One day Shivaram said to me, "Uncle, are you my father's brother or his brother-in-law?" And the Paramansa is like a child. He doesn't keep any track of his whereabouts. He sees everything as Brahman. He is indifferent to his own movements. Shivaram went to Hriday's house to see the Durga Puja. He slipped out of the house and wandered away. A passerby saw the child, who was then only 4 years old, and asked, "Where do you come from?" He couldn't say much. He only said the word hut. He was speaking of the big hut in which the image of the Divine Mother was being worshipped. The stranger asked him further, "Whom are you living with?" He only said the word brother. I remember a child knocking on my door. Knock, knock. And I said, "Who is there?" And he said, "It's me." This is the way the child thinks. Sometimes the Paramahamsa behaves like a madman. A few days after the dedication of the temple at Dakshinasara, a madman came there who was really a sage endowed with the knowledge of Brahman. He had a bamboo twig in one hand and a potted mango plant in the other, and was wearing torn shoes. People today would put him in something like a lunatic asylum. He didn't follow any social conventions. After bathing in the Ganga, he didn't perform any religious rites. He ate something that he carried in a corner of his wearing cloth. Then he entered the Kali temple and chanted hymns to the deity. The temple seemed to tremble. Halatari was then in the shrine, and the bad man wasn't allowed to eat at the guest house, but he paid no attention to this slight. He searched for food in the rubbish heap where the dogs were eating crumbs from the discarded leaf plates. Now and then he pushed the dogs aside to get his crumbs. The dogs didn't mind either. See, this is the nature of Paramahamsa. There are wild geese that travel. I wrote a poem some time ago like that. They travel from Canada all the way to Africa, to Europe and Africa and so on. Thousands of miles they travel. And they are so in tune with nature, and they simply are allowed, go with the winds, and they go in a certain formation. And the formation is with the knowledge that those behind the leader will take the benefit of the airflow, the airlift that is being generated by the wings. So they go in arrow formation. What a wonderful thing. Now, this is a Paramahamsa, a supreme swan, or a supreme goose, some entity that is attuned thoroughly with nature and lets go. That's the key. Uninhibitedly lets go and does it in a supreme way. That's the characteristic of a Paramahamsa, is what he's saying. Halatari, of course, follows this man and asks him, "Who are you? Are you a perfect knower of Brahman?" And the madman whispered, "Shh, yes, I'm a perfect knower of Brahman." My heart began to palpitate as Halatari told me about it, because he understood. I clung to him. I said to the Divine Mother, "Mother, shall I too have to pass through such a state?" See the child aspect coming in. We all went to see the man. He spoke words of great wisdom to us, but behaved like a madman before others. Revealed himself to those who were who were suitable to have this knowledge expressed to. So he was followed in a great way when he left the garden. After passing the gate, he said to Halatari, "What else shall I say to you? When you no longer make any distinction between the water of this pool and the water of the Ganga, then you may know that you have perfect knowledge." And saying this, he walked rapidly away. And then Sri Ramakrishna began to talk with them. Other devotees too were present, and so on. It goes on like that. Now that might, of course, that whole episode might frighten a novice. Will I get out of my comfort zone? We have to get out of our comfort zone. What else should we do? So what was Matu Babu's comfort zone? Matu Mohan, his comfort zone was, I'm a landlord, I'm a businessman, my job is to collect money, I have a responsibility, this is my business, this is my land, and this is, I have to do the business about it regardless, and feeling doesn't come into it. That's his point of view from the start. Ramakrishna has shifted 1,000 miles away from that position. Not at all. This is not your land. It's not your position. You are the mother's warden. You are taking care of the mother's business. And these are the mother's children looking like that. Nay, they are the mother herself. This is pure consciousness expressed like this. Look at the condition. Let us be compassionate and try and do something to help. And these two incidences in Sri Ramakrishna's pilgrimages will illustrate the fundamental sameness, the synchronicity of the message that Swamiji gave and enacted till today, and the thinking and the message of the Master. How could it be otherwise, you see? So we all have to shift that thinking. We all have to get out of our comfort zone. We all have to get out of our standard way of possessive thinking. This is mine, me and mine. This is my body, this is my mind, my bank account, my house, my family, my children, my grandchildren, my country. Even the nationalism comes in. When I gave that example, Ramakrishna's, that this is God's land, these two people, the Israelis and Palestinians, their mouths fell open. They said, oh my goodness, what a wonderful way of putting it. That's true. Palestinians said, we are Muslim. We believe this is God's land and we are subject to his will. And the Israeli Jewish people were saying, yes, we also agree. We are, this is also his land, not his chosen people's land, not a select group's land. It's humanity's land, and that means it's God's land. It belongs to him and his children. He can give it any way he likes or take it away. So that's the first shift we have to make. The first shift we have to make is away from I and me and mine, from the prophet-actor complex that we assume we are. This is called, briefly, renunciation, renouncing the fruits, not becoming a monk or a nun, but renouncing the fruits of your activities on the basis they're not mine. They don't belong to me. Let's return them to the correct owner. And then a shift in attitude to do with this attitude that says, actually, I'm no individual. I have no self-image sense or self-consciousness. I can do away with that. And I can look at things as a child looks at them. After all, am I not just a child? Are we not all just children? I remember the General Secretary of the Sharda Math coming to visit us. And I introduced her. And I said, this is the General Secretary, the revered General Secretary of the Sharda Math. And she looked at me as any kindly grandmother would look. Mother, not grandmother, I suppose. And she said to the audience, yeah, he may say all that, but I'm a child of the mother. See that beautiful way of looking at things and expressing things. But what are we suffering from? We're suffering from the petulance of a spoiled child, thinking that we deserve everything and we haven't got and we want more. So that's childishness. Be like a child. All the great teachers will tell us this. And the greatest example of these would be these Paramahamsas, and Ramakrishna was like that. But he could change. He could be a teacher, he could be a master, he could be a father. But when he was in the mode of the child of the Divine Mother, he was a child. And that whole truthfulness and innocence that goes with it when we think like this, the view of our whole world will change. Instead of thinking that we are individual, having to struggle against unfair odds, we can think, no, I'm always looked after. There's an entity that decides to invest life in me, digest my food, gives me pocket money for thinking, useless thinking, repairs my cells, gives me a life force, a direction, a skill, a talent, and fits me nicely into a mode where I can be useful if I have a will to be. Or I can waste it, of course, that also is true. So we have to take this investment that we have, this divine investment that is within us. So I'm going to leave it at that for today. And the reason why, I just reiterate, we have these Saturday, Sunday meetings is so that you have material now to reflect on, to see what is the practical change I can make in my own life, what is the shift in attitude that I can take on board, and how can I be inspired by the scenes that I can thoroughly contemplate on, absorb, and delight in. So with these few words, I say thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.